Zoe, and I'm the Regional Coordinator of the River Detectives program, along with the statewide coordinator based here at the North Central CMA. Welcome to another River Detectives online learning session. We're adding to the suite of Ask the Expert webinars that we have available to deepen student and teacher learning about waterways and catchments. Our topic today is taking dull dams to become dynamic dwellings. A bit of an alliteration there, and helping us reimagine a dam or a water body we might have at home or at school or in the community, and taking it to the next level to become a clean, green, productive hotspot. We're so pleased to offer this topic today because it's a really positive and achievable project to enhance a dam, something that we can all do. It's a very rewarding project that students can explore at home, with their family, at school, or even within their community. And we're extremely fortunate today to be joined by a highly regarded expert, Professor David Lindenmayer. Thank you, David. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Awesome. And a little about David. David works at Australian National University in Canberra. He is a world-leading expert in forest ecology and resource management, conservation science and biodiversity conservation. Currently running 5 large-scale long-term research projects in southeastern Australia, developing ways to conserve biodiversity on farmland, in wood production, forests, plantations and reserves. He has written many scientific articles, 49 books, and is considered one of the leading conservation and biodiversity experts in the nation. So we're very privileged. So again, thank you and for giving up your time and sharing your passion and expertise with us. We are aware that this topic and, of course, the chance to listen to David will be viewed as an ideal opportunity for a much broader audience than just our River Detective students. So we do welcome anyone that's watching, maybe land carers or just the general community. Now, I would like to acknowledge that I'm sitting here near Bendigo in North Central Victoria on Jara country today, and we acknowledge Jara's rich and enduring connection to country and the role that they continue to play in keeping waterways and catchments healthy. And where are you joining us today from, David? Which country?
I'm from Ngunnawal country, and nearby is Ngambri country. But the work that we've been doing is across a whole series of nations. Ngunnawal, Ngambri, Wiradjuri, right across a whole suite of places. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to work on that country.
Absolutely. And because we do have a diverse audience, just a little bit about the River Detectives program first. For those who may not be aware, River Detectives is an environmental education program. It's inspiring teachers and students right across Victoria to connect with their local waterway, to understand it through citizen science and appreciate its value in the ecosystem and even advocate for waterway and catchment health in their local community. It's a really free, fun and flexible way for schools to connect their students with nature through monthly water quality testing, water bug sampling and habitat surveys. And schools really value that opportunity to use real life data about places that are dear to them and understand that integral link between water and land, plants and animals, people and communities. And thank you to the River Detective students who have enthusiastically sent in questions for today's webinar. We've had questions come in from around the state. Great response from grade 3-4 students at St Joseph's Primary School in Kerrang. They're on the Loddon River in the North Central CMA region. We've had questions from Toowoomba Primary School on the Kiewa River in the North East CMA region, and a really important and insightful question from Timboon P12 School on the Curtis River in the Corangamite CMA region. So we will get to those during the session. So let's get started. Dams are dotted across the Australian landscape for water storage, watering points for stock, for irrigation, recreation, and just because we all feel better when we look at water, let's face it. But they are untapped potential, and there's a really good opportunity to take dams to the next level and turn them from dull to dynamic so that they can fill multiple roles for all those reasons we just talked about, but also to be habitat havens for fish and macroinvertebrates, frogs, turtles, water birds, and all sorts of other fauna. So over to you, David, if you could start your talk now, and I'll jump in with questions when they relate. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. So whenever we look at a farm, if we look closely, we see that there's lots of very important natural assets on farms. They might be the patches of remnant vegetation, the scattered paddock trees, the rocky outcrops, the shelter belts. And one of the natural assets that's largely been ignored for the last 30 or 40 years are farm dams. Now, farm dams are really common, and in many cases, they've actually replaced the natural wetlands that are in a landscape. And what we're going to talk about through this presentation is that if farm dams are well managed, they can play many of the roles of natural wetlands, not only for biodiversity, but for tackling climate change. So let's just do a little bit of background first before we get to that, and talk about agriculture and landscape change. So we know that agriculture is one of the biggest drivers of extinction worldwide. And perhaps the best way to think about this is the number of mammals in our landscapes. So across the world now, 60% of all the biomass of mammals across the planet is livestock, cows and sheep, 60%. Humans make up 36% of all the mammal biomass on the planet. And native mammals, only 4%. So that's all the whales, the dolphins, the seals, the giraffes, the elephants. You put all those animals together, it's only 4% of the world's total mammal biomass. And that means that most of the mammal biomass is actually in agricultural landscapes. And so there's been an enormous amount of land clearing to create pastures, paddocks for animals such as cows and sheep. And those changes have had enormous impacts on the world's landscapes. So nearly 3 billion hectares of the world's agricultural land, it's called arable land, is now degraded. And that area is bigger than the size of the world's biggest country, which is Russia. And the impacts that farming has had on the land to degrade that land affects more than 3 billion people. And we estimate that it's going to cost about $4 trillion to fix. So that's almost the size of the entire American economy, the biggest economy in the world. Now, our region is called Oceania, and it's not only Australia, but New Zealand and many other parts of the Pacific. And there's about 360 million hectares of degraded agricultural land. But perhaps if we think back to other places that are important, such as parts of Victoria around what we call the Murray-Darling Basin. So some of our rivers flow north or northwest into the Murray-Darling system. Up to 15 billion trees have been taken out of that area. So these are really massive changes. And one of the ecosystems around the world that has been the most altered are Australia's temperate woodlands, like this area that you can see in this slide. And I think it's really important to understand that if you were to be one of the first British invaders coming to Australia in 1788, and if you landed in Melbourne rather than in Sydney, you could have then walked from Melbourne to Brisbane through almost continuous woodland the entire way. Now, 99% of some of these woodlands are now removed, and in other cases, it's 95%. So these are enormous changes to some of these really quite beautiful landscapes, such as these areas of box gum woodland that you can see in this slide. And many of the remaining woodlands, as you can see in this slide, are actually quite degraded. And so a really important change in the landscape is not only the number of trees, but also the condition of those trees. And many of these trees were actually trees that first germinated and started growing before British invaders came to this continent. Okay, so I work in a project called Sustainable Farms, And we've got lots of projects in Victoria, New South Wales, and growing right up to Queensland. And they're looking at different kinds of studies. And one of the most important parts of this Sustainable Farms project is looking at ways that we can improve the natural assets on farms. How can we improve their condition so that they're not only good for farmers and maintaining the productivity of their agricultural production, but also improving the condition so that they're better for biodiversity, birds, mammals, reptiles, and even some of our work on invertebrates. Okay, so one of the key projects that we're looking at is the one at the top of that slide, and that is enhancing farm dams. And we've actually written books on this. This is a book that came out just a few years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, thinking about how you change farming to improve those natural assets and then improve biodiversity as well as the productivity of farms. And so we do a lot of these field days where we take farmers to meet with school groups around areas that are being restored. And this is a farm dam that was in poor condition, and it's now starting to be renovated to improve that condition. So just to give you a little bit of background, there's over 1.765 million dams in Australia. So there's been work with satellites to work out not only where all the dams are, but also how deep the water is in some of those dams. And about 650,000 of those dams are in the Murray-Darling Basin, which includes parts of Victoria and New South Wales as well as Queensland. And quite sadly, over 97% of those dams are in very poor condition. And at the bottom of this slide, you'll actually see some livestock, some cows actually in the water of a very, very poor condition dam. Now, what we know is just like when humans drink bad water and you get sick, livestock can drink, cattle and sheep can drink poor quality water, and it has a big effect on how they put on weight. And we see there's a big reduction in their weight, or the rate at which they fatten up when they're drinking poor quality water. Now, there's very little work that's been done on how to fix up a dam. So this has been part of our research for the last 3 years. And what we see is that when you start to change the way you do the management of those dams and you begin a renovation process to fix up those dams, you see that the water stays in the dam for longer. It doesn't evaporate and you lose your water. And that's really important for helping farmers to deal with droughts.
Mm.
But we also see big changes in the biodiversity associated with these dams, and we'll come to that in a minute. But also when a farmer's livestock, his or her cattle and sheep are drinking better quality water, those animals are bigger and they're worth more when they're sold at market. The other thing is that many farmers are actually starting to put in little areas where there's seats and places to go and have a cup of tea or just to relax after a hard day on the farm. So these are places that are really important for farmers' mental health.
Nice.
And so we've been doing some work to show exactly this, that farmers that renovate their dams and fix up the natural assets on their farms are actually in a better mental health space.
Lovely. I might just jump in there and ask a question that one of our students from Kerrang had, and it's a good slide to talk to that because you've got two vastly different photos of dams there. But Isaac was wondering, and I think Isaac might even have a dam at his place, as many of our students will have, if they're looking at their dam at home after listening and watching this episode or this webinar, how can they tell just by looking at it if the dam is healthy? Are there a few key things that you could point out even in these two photos perhaps that are the key signs if it's healthy or not visually?
Yeah, so clearly you can, we often see that there's a big difference in the amount of sediment in a dam. So the amount of soil, the amount of animal waste that's being washed into a dam. So there are some really important telltale signs. If you have very few trees around a dam, that has a big effect. And often the animals themselves will walk right into the water, and they'll poo and wee in the water as well, which makes it pretty bad. So there's some pretty good telltale signs of the quality of the water, how degraded the vegetation is around the dam, and how few trees there are around the dam to shade it, to help reduce the amount of evaporation.
And our students will already be making links because as part of their involvement in our program, they're testing for phosphorus and they're testing for turbidity. So, yeah, obviously those the sediments increasing that turbidity and the poo is increasing the phosphorus. A couple of the students, in fact, quite a few, Laurie, Stella, Ruby, all asked what animals would be likely to live in a dam. So if you compare the creatures that might be finding the dam on the left, the dull dam, as a good habitat compared to the creatures on the dynamic dam on the right, is there, just briefly, could you describe the difference in the creatures that those two dams would sustain?
There's huge differences, and that's something that we've studied very much in detail. So there are many more birds associated, native birds associated with the dam that's in good condition. Many more species of frogs. There are other things that turn up in well-managed dams that are really quite unexpected. So not only things like caddisflies, many more yabbies and different kinds of yabbies, but some are unexpected things as well. So we've started to detect freshwater sponges.
Wow.
In some of the dams that up until a few months ago, we didn't even realise even existed in these kinds of places. So there are a whole range of very special animals that start to turn up in dams, often quite quickly. Native fish as well are much more likely to be in a well-managed dam. In fact, poorly managed dams have very few species associated with them. And there's such a marked difference. You almost don't even need to study it. Yep. And there are other things that are turning up, special aquatic plants and other beasties that you wouldn't expect to start to nest in these areas. The other thing that's quite fascinating is that in dams that are poorly managed, what we do see are animals like snails that are carrying parasites which are very nasty for livestock, but also for humans.
Okay. We
don't see that nearly as much in well-managed farm dams. So what we see, for example, in the particular dam that's well-managed here, is often that they're fenced. The livestock aren't accessing the water body, but there's surrounding tussock grasses, and in those tussock grasses there are things like stumpy tail lizards and blue tongue lizards that are eating the snails. And
whole food chains supported.
So that's right. And so the things like some of the flukes and some of the other nasty parasites actually not getting into the water body, and therefore not getting into the animals, and not putting farmers at risk as well.
And interestingly, you talk about things turning up, because that was actually a really good question that Ivy, Jack and Jack T from Kerrang wanted to know. They were curious about how animals just seem to turn up in dams when they're not only filled by rain, they're not filled by, a creek or a river entering the dam. So how do they get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sometimes when farm dams are designed, they're in the lowest part of the landscape. So they'll be in the lowest part of a paddock, and that's where you want them to be because they're more likely to fill up. And I think there are occasions when there's water that moves across the landscape, when there's minor flooding or even major flooding events. Things start to make their way into these environments, including tadpoles and young fish and things like that.
Yeah, they just build it and they will come.
Yes, for many things, not all of them, but for many things, that's true.
So I suppose the big question from both Toowoomba Primary School and Kerrang students, Danica and Tamika, is how do we go about cleaning the water in a dam and encouraging more life, which will probably lead into your next slide now. How do we go about it?
Yeah, good question. And this is something that we've been researching for several years now. And one of the most important things is to make sure that the area around a dam is fenced. And that's important for several reasons. One is that it reduces the amount of erosion that takes place in the environment around the dam. And you can solve the problem of access for your stock in two ways. One is that you can create what's called a hardened access point, and you can see that on the right of the diagram here. And animals will move down that hardened access point. So there might be crushed rock or sometimes a little concrete race that takes animals into the dam. And the interesting thing about their behaviour is that they don't tend to poo and wee in the dam when you do that. Animals will turn around and then go back out into the paddock and do their poos and wees out in the paddock. The other thing that seems to be important is that if you plant tussocks and other grasses around the dam, that seems to help filter out the animal wastes from the surrounding paddock. So if you have a very big rain event, what happens is that a lot of that material gets washed into the dam. But if you've got tussocks and other grass covers, that material seems to be filtered out. And as I was saying before, there seems to be some evidence that some of the small reptiles that are living in the tussocks and grassy areas are starting to feed on snails and other things that are carriers of parasites. So planting the tussocks, planting trees in areas that provide shade for the dam is also very important because that keeps the water cool. And it also means that you lose less water through evaporation, particularly if you're smart about where you put the trees relative to the normal direction that the wind comes from.
Yep.
So that's important. And many of the farmers that we work with now are using solar pumps to pump water to a water trough so animals don't access the dam at all. Now, this has another really valuable effect, and that is that once you've got tussocks in place and you don't have animals going in and out of the water body all the time, you have a lot less mud. So when you start to have a drought and you've got these muddy banks of dams, it's quite a number of occasions where animals get bogged and die in the dam, which fouls the water, but it's also a welfare issue if you start losing your livestock that way. So with a solar pump, you're pumping water back out into the trough, and that water tends to be cooler because it's shaded, and it means that animals are more likely to drink cooler water, and they're more likely to then want to go out into the paddock and keep feeding, which is some of the reasons why animals that are drinking good quality cool water tend to put on weight much faster. So there's a range of things that we can do. Now, some farmers really do like to have native plants and animals on their farms. And so they do other things. They might put little islands in the dam when the dam's being built. And that often provides shelter for animals from nasty things like foxes and cats, which aren't likely to swim across the dam to get at their nests. The other thing is that some farmers build a little shelf into the dam, where there are flatter areas, and that's a really good place for some birds to forage. And some of the other animals that find their way into these environments, like long-necked tortoises, they like to bask in the sun, particularly if there's a big old tree, a dead tree or a branch that's in the dam, or if you've got these little muddy platforms that are quite shallow that they can go and spend time sunning themselves. So there's actually a recipe there that our farmers use to help them work out how to renovate a dam.
And if kids that are listening have dams that they're thinking of, either at home or school or in the community that don't have stock accessing it, then the options are even greater, aren't they, in terms of not having to cater for the drinking of the stock. It's just revegetation and habitat enhancement.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's remarkable how quickly things will change. The work that we've done indicates that we can start to see really quite substantial changes within 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, great.
Which is fantastic. And so many farmers are doing things like this. They've started to work with land care and catchment management authorities and begun the process of renovating with the right kinds of plants. And it's really important to understand that we want to plant native plants here. We don't want willows.
Nope.
We don't want poplars. We want things like she oaks and tea tree and eucalypts. Now, we don't want to be planting on the dam wall, because you'll destabilize the dam wall and your dam will start to fall to pieces, which is not what you want.
No.
And so there are people doing really exciting things, where there's a tree that's fallen, it's part of it's gone into the water. And often if you look closely during the day, you'll see animals sunning themselves, sometimes feeding around these kinds of areas. And the hollow logs often turn out to be really fantastic places for fish to shelter and lay their eggs. So yeah, it's
Great.
very exciting to see how quickly some of these things are changing.
Yeah, and you've already alluded to it. A couple of the Kerrang kids, Laurie and Toby, were wondering, what the bad plants are. What should we be avoiding? And you've mentioned, your non-natives, and perhaps not a bad plant, but location of things like gum trees, not on the dam wall. And what are some of the good ones? So I know you've mentioned your tussocks, being, your grasses and some aquatic vegetation, I suppose, too.
Yeah, some of that will make its way into the dam anyway.
Yeah.
Sometimes on the feet of birds that are coming to check out the water body. Once the dam's really started to make progress in terms
That's
of being
interesting.
renovated. Yeah.
Yeah, the plant version of how these animals turn up, they come on the animals if they're the plants. Yeah.
Yes. Or sometimes they'll be washed down from there might be another dam or a wetland further upstream.
Yep.
And some of these things will start to make their way through the environment to these places. So, and it's remarkable how quickly some of this can start happening. So the Kumbunji.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, the Kumbunji in the foreground of this image, that's a response after only a year or two. Yes, they've been good years, but the dams are responding very quickly, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and that will control itself. It won't take over the dam. It'll only sort of have its nice little spot, the fringing areas of the dam where it likes to be.
Yeah, once into the deeper water, no, we don't tend to, but we do see a lot of aquatic other plants that are important, and they're important for keeping the water cooler, but also helping to sift out some of the sediments, and so we end up with a much better quality dam once those plants start to be there and stabilise things, as opposed to the dam that we saw previously.
Yeah, and thinking about those food chains, we've mentioned those creatures that might like to live in these healthy dams. What will they be eating, and what will be eating them?
Oh gosh, so you start to see a whole range of food webs begin to develop. So you have birds like grebes eating vegetation, but we also see yabbies start to colonise, and they're little micro predators, and then other birds, cormorants, coming in feeding as well. And then we have caddisflies and other little predatory insects, but then we have other birds and other animals starting to feed on them as well. We even have platypus that are now colonising some of these dams, which is really wonderful.
It's amazing. Yeah. And our river detective students with their water bug sampling love to, caddisfly larvae are the favourite bug to find, obviously, when you see a walking stick.
Yes.
So, they'll be very familiar with that.
So the other reason not to plant willows is that willows end up giving you very tight root mass around the bank.
Yeah.
And that's impossible for animals like platypus to be able to make a burrow in the side of a dam or a watercourse. So that's why we recommend strongly against planting willows. Willows tend to also use a lot of water, so that that reduces the amount of water that's available not only to livestock but for other animals in these systems. So that's really important to be aware of. We also know that if we plant exotic introduced plants, we tend to get a lot more animals like sparrows and starlings and goldfinches, which are introduced birds that we don't really want.
Yeah. Go with the natives that are Indigenous to your area.
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's the best way to go.
Couple of other little questions there from Toowoomba Primary School. They've asked, would you think about introducing fish or just, and if so, what, or would you just let nature see what's going to come back?
That's a good question. Some landowners that we've been working with have introduced some very threatened fish, such as Macquarie perch.
Yep.
In other cases, fish can be pretty fierce predators of tadpoles. Particularly introduced fish like mosquito fish. We don't want that in our dams. That's bad news. And we also don't want goldfish, given how much they disperse through the landscape as well, cause problems. So I think it's important to think through what sorts of fish you want in your dam. They need to be native fish, no doubt about that. We've got enough problems with introduced animals in Australia without making it worse. So we've also done some economics work, and I'm not an economist, but I work with people that are, and we figured out that it costs about $7,000 to fix a dam. But if your livestock are growing faster and are in better condition and get a better return when you take them to market and sell them, we've discovered that you can make your money back from fixing a dam within 2 to 3 years. Okay, so, and we can see some remarkable things changing very quickly once people really start to get into this process of renovating dams. So this dam was rebuilt, and a fence was put in quite a ways back from where the water is, and then there was a race or a hardened access point, and then the farmer actually put in a little island in the dam as well. And then once we start to see what's happening, the changes, yes, it's been a few wet years, but excluding the stock and planting some vegetation around this has been really quite remarkable. Now, I know you've got a couple of slides that you wanted to show.
Yeah, I have, because from a personal point of view, we were very lucky in 2001 to buy a 108-acre property not far out of Bendigo, and never intended to farm it. So we just really wanted to bring nature back to it. So this, before and after photo from our own property, 2001 to 2024. And obviously the tree there is exactly the same tree. So you're looking at exactly the same scene. And apart from the fact that there's now a house there, the difference to the dam, because when we first bought the place, it had only been cropping and sheep. The dam banks were denuded of any vegetation at all. They were completely bare. I don't know what sort of seed bank was still left in the soil, but when we excluded stock, and that wasn't just putting a fence around it, but there were no stock on the property anymore, we just started doing little things. So although, yes, it can cost $7,000 to renovate a dam in a farming situation where you do need to retain stock access, we were able to do a lot with a little. So we just started planting a little bit of aquatic veg, but more often the native shrubs and trees back from the dam bank itself. And like you said, it just went from strength to strength. Everything just came back. And we're lucky that it is a dam that has naturally shallow areas when it fills to capacity. So on the left-hand side of the dynamic dam photo is a nice shallow area where the reeds just grow in 20 to 30 centimetres of water, and that's where we often see a lot of our wading birds. And then there's a lot of shrubs around where the photo's been taken, where we get a lot of smaller birds coming in, feeling really comfortable being able to shelter there before they duck down and have a drink. And yeah, it's just been incredible. So we would have had only really seen magpies, noisy miners, ravens probably at our place 20 years ago. And now we're seeing a whole heap of birds, which leads into what you'll be talking about soon, because it's not just what we did on the dam, but what we've done around the property that's brought that diversity back. And the next slide is just from another view, really. So looking back the other way, it was we cropped for 1 year down in the bottom there to get a crop of straw that we could make our house with, built a straw bale home. But you can see there we just started putting in those shrubs. And that one tree that you can see in the Dull Dam photo is a willow, who the farmer that we bought our place from was so proud of that he'd got something to grow there, but we just had to quietly remove that later when we had the chance. And yeah, you can't even see that bottom paddock now in the photo on the right. So we've continued to add. So as things have grown and the dam's just looking after itself now, we've started to put in extra things like some nest boxes, keeping the dead trees as they die off, because they're really important roosts. And then I've also been adding a few more prickly dense shrubs for a lot of the smaller birds as well. And we've seen, and I'm a bit of a birdo myself, so we've got now grebes. Literally, when I went down to take that photo the other morning, a spoonbill and a cormorant flew off, and we've had native hens nesting and raising chicks on our dam as well. So, and all the other things we've done around the place, we've seen the red-browed finches, diamond firetails, even button quails coming back. So yeah, it's really, really rewarding. It's just beautiful to live amongst that regeneration.
You might remember when we talked about this dam in very poor condition, and there are lots of dams like this, that a lot of animal waste either ends up in the dam because cows and sheep are actually directly pooing and weeing into the water, but also a lot of that waste gets washed from the paddock and into the dam. Now, when you add water and hard waste, you get methane. When you add animal wheeze, urine, and water, you get nitrous oxide, and both of them are very nasty greenhouse gases, much worse than carbon dioxide. So we've been measuring with a team at Deakin University, been measuring with these devices on the water body in the dam. We've been measuring how much greenhouse gas emissions are coming off dams that are like that one, that are in very poor condition, and ones that are in the process of being renovated. And what we've discovered is that dams that are in a very poor condition are a really major source of greenhouse gases, very nasty ones, methane, nitrous oxide, whereas dams that are in good condition become a carbon sink. So what's happening is that the change in the vegetation means that they're starting to rather than give off lots of methane, they're now starting to absorb carbon, and so the dams have changed from being a source to a sink. So that is quite remarkable. So by starting to change a dam, you are removing the equivalent emissions of a small fleet of cars, which is quite fantastic. So but fixing the dams in one region of southern New South Wales would be the equivalent of taking all the cars off the road in Albury and Wodonga, which, they're two of the biggest inland cities in Australia put together. So this is really, really quite important. But as you were saying before, Nicole, there's actually something even more interesting than just fixing up a dam or just doing revegetation. And that is that when you put the dams and the plantings together, we really start to see things changing in important ways. So what that means is 1 and 1 is more than 2. And we start to see beautiful animals like the squirrel glider starting to come into these areas that are replanted, where we have maybe only 1 or 2 big trees around a dam, like the huge tree that was in very good condition next to your dam. And then we're starting to see other birds come in, such as the red wattlebird, a noisy friarbird, and in fact, a whole range of species that are starting to come back into these environments where we put a planting together with a dam, and that includes brown tree creepers, flame robins, babblers, crested shrike tits, diamond firetails, and so we've been documenting the species that are coming back. But also what's happening is that many of these bird species are actually starting to breed, and we've been able to determine a much, much greater level of breeding success from those birds that are in areas where there's a dam and a planting together. And so the combined benefits of doing these kinds of plantings to not only fix a dam, but to create this quite active regrowth vegetation is really quite stunning. So there's just some of the things that have come from the Sustainable Farms project, and I'm happy to take further questions if people want to follow up.
Yeah, well, we don't need any more convincing after listening to that great presentation that, turning dams from being dull to dynamic is the way to go. But we did have a question from Timboon P12 School. Now, they've got an amazing and highly acclaimed program at their school called the Timboon Agricultural Project, and they do lots of amazing things linking up with agriculture in their area. And they wondered, do you have any suggestions for strategies that can help landowners appreciate the importance of fencing off their waterways and enhancing dams in the catchment area where they are? I suppose listening to this would be one way, but also I suppose the unsaid thing in this is, how do you persuade? How, if you've got someone who's reluctant, what are some of the best ways? And perhaps even as students, could there be an advocacy role as students at that school to step into that space and educate, I suppose, from the younger generation to the farmers in the area?
Absolutely. I think children tend to be very good at persuading their parents at doing things at times.
Yes.
I always think that's a good thing to do, particularly as they're inheriting the earth, and frankly, my generation's made a big mess of it, and I would like to see our generation do more to make it better for the next generations coming through. I think there's great value in having demonstration projects, so that people can physically see what's happened. So that your farm dam is a classic example of being able to show someone over a period of 2 decades, wow, what an incredible change.
Yeah.
But also I think it's really important to indicate to farmers that if you're concerned about droughts, which we all should be, then how do I keep water for longer on my farm? And this is a classic case of being able to have water that persists for longer, that's of better quality, which means that the livestock is going to be better. So the ways that we can, there are lots of ways to try to make change. One is to have demonstration farms and demonstration dams. Another one is through education, like these webinars where people hear what the opportunities are. The other way is to educate people in land care and in catchment management authorities about the value of fixing dams in this way and creating these little micro wetlands and the importance of these kinds of habitats for many species. And being able to arm people with the scientific evidence of how you do that, but also the economic evidence of the benefits financially from making those changes.
Yeah.
So everybody's got a role to play here, whether it's an educator, whether it's the offspring of a parent and a parent that you want to change, or a parent that wants to educate their kids about some of the things that can happen, or farmers telling other farmers about how they've made their change. So when we run demonstration farm days in the Sustainable Farms Project, we always have a farmer telling other farmers about how they've made their changes. And normally what we see is that it takes about 3 demonstration farm days for somebody to attend those events before they're ready to make a change.
See that it's doable and worthwhile for a whole range of reasons.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, great advice. It seems to me that there's not too many downsides to doing this. It really just does have, economic, biodiversity, wellbeing benefits. So, Yeah, just imagine how much healthier our catchments would be if we took all these dams that are dotted across the landscape and made them those stepping stones, those biodiversity stepping stones and the connectivity that's so lacking, I suppose, in our post-European landscape. It's good for farms, it's good for productivity, which is always going to win farmers over, good for us and our well-being, and good for native plants and animals. So a win-win for all. So people that are watching can learn more at the website that's on the screen now. There's a great section all about the benefits of enhancing a dam, and some really great tools with revegetation lists and all sorts of things. So yeah, we encourage you to check it out. But that is all for now, David, and we really do want to thank you so much for your time, your passion and your expertise. It's been a really great practical session, so thank you very much.
Thank you.